Different people speak differently, but those differences aren't just what they say, but in how they say it. From the most obvious of accents to simple body language. That's one reason why dialogue is such a powerful tool in fiction. It lets you show your characters to the audience instead of just describing them. They can say where they're from, what their backgrounds are, their education, if they're comfortable in a situation, or so many other things. It can draw readers into a scene and make your story so much more fun to read. Or it can be stiff and awkward and pull readers out of a story. That's why we want our dialogue to be top notch. So here are 9 tips for creating better dialogue. First, let's start with a simple one. Don't pile on distracting dialogue tags, such as he whined, she commanded, or they queried, which draw attention to themselves. The old standbys, said, told, and asked are less noticeable and let readers focus on your character's words. You can throw in some of the more complex ones occasionally, but they don't add as much depth as some of the other things we're going to talk about in this list. There's also a case to be made for occasionally abandoning dialogue tags. If 2 characters are talking back and forth, it's pretty clear who's speaking when. In this case, the dialogue tags become filler words that don't really add anything to the story. Cutting some of the dialogue tags can help pick up the pacing of the scene and remove words that don't add any clarity. Give each of your characters a unique voice inside of your head as you write their dialogue. Their unique voices will come from a variety of different factors, such as their age, their personality, their education, or their relationship with the people they're talking to. This is one of the fundamental tools when it comes to making great dialogue, and you can really see when it's done well and when it's done poorly. Let's take a look at this clip from The Witcher. First, a man tells Geralt,
"She gave us a message to pass on to you. You have to choose the lesser evil."
He doesn't seem particularly aggressive, but he speaks sternly and seems confident. But then the next man says,
"It's an ultimatum. Get it?"
This takes the first man's line and kind of rewords it to add clarity to the scene and also characterize this man who is speaking. He's gruffer than the first man, more blunt. Then there's a pause to show Geralt's contemplation of what to do in the scene. And pauses are very important for dialogue, but we'll get to that a little bit later. Fun. Here, the Witcher has made the decision to fight, and we can see that he's not happy about it. And by the way that he approaches the men, we can see that he is not scared of them. Moments later, we see why. Which is great. There are some good things happening in that scene, but if we look a little bit closer, would some random hired idiot in medieval times say the word
ultimatum?
It's up for debate, but I think not. It actually sounds pretty silly to hear it come out of his mouth. All I heard was this.
"I'm giving you an all tomato," meaning that you give me the whole tomato or else.
The audience needs to understand what's happening in a scene so I can see what they were going for. But characters still need to speak in a way that makes sense for their background. Most people in the Middle Ages were illiterate, so ultimatum seems unlikely. We can also learn a great deal about a character by the kind of slang that they use. Imagine a character who unironically says things like YOLO and swag. You immediately can see the person I'm talking about, and I only used 2 words. The key to giving your character a distinct voice is understanding who they are, their background, their personality. Get in touch with your characters and you'll be able to hear what they say and how they say it. Know when to summarize. If your character talks for an hour about their golf technique, you can't include the entire speech in your story, unless it is absolutely important for your audience to know how to hit a hole-in-one with a 9-iron. Instead, you can summarize. John went on for an hour about his golf technique. It's not always clear when you should summarize. Personally, I tend to overwrite dialogue. It's easier to cut something out while you're editing than it is to add extra dialogue if it feels too sparse. That doesn't mean we should always summarize though, which leads us to our next tip. You can mix a couple of lines of dialogue into your summary to give it the flavor of what your characters actually sound like. "Been working on my swing," John said, launching into an hour-long discourse on his golf technique. Mixing this two still gives you the opportunity to show how your character is unique, like in tip number 2, but also spares your audience a bunch of boring dialogue, like in tip number 3. In real life, only like 20% of the stuff we say is actually important anyway. All the rest of it is just filler words like, or talking about the League of Legends meta. Mixing dialogue and summary can show how your characters are people who go on rants and small talk, while sparing your audience the boring details. Often people don't express what's exactly on their minds. Instead, they hint at it in other ways. If John is attracted to Marcia, he might not come out and say to her, "I'm attracted to you." That could be weird. Instead, he might become boastful around her or steer the conversation to find out if she's in a relationship. The best dialogue often has at least 2 levels to it: what the characters are saying on the surface and what they actually mean. You can also achieve this subtextual level of dialogue through action. How someone says something and what they're doing while they say it can communicate a lot more than what they're actually saying. Maybe John does straight up tell Marcia that he's attracted to her, but the way that he says it can change its meaning. For example,
I'm attracted to you. I'm attracted to you. I'm attracted to you.
These different ways of communicating give different meaning to the dialogue, even if the words haven't changed at all. Anxious, overconfident, disinterested. But what happens when there's no words? Pauses in a conversation can be just as expressive as action or speech. When a character stops to think, it can relay a lot of information about how they feel about the topic without saying it out loud. Returning to Netflix's The Witcher, we saw in that fight scene from before that Geralt is taking a moment to weigh his options. That brief moment shows us that he isn't rash and thinks over his options before he gets into a fight. His body language as well shows us that he's not intimidated by the group who threatens him, even though he's wildly outnumbered. What about John and Marcia though? What if John says he's attracted to her and then she has an uncomfortably long pause?
Hello, darkness.
Fun. What does she do? There's a moment of uncertainty as she thinks about what her play is. Silences can also affect the pacing of a conversation. Say 2 people are locked in an argument and then suddenly one of them pauses. That could signal a conclusion to the energy you've built up. Or say a conversation is filled with pauses, but they slowly fade away as it gets more heated. Pauses give you the ability to change the pacing of dialogue, as well as give you time to show what your characters are doing. We can learn a lot about writing dialogue by actually listening to people. Listen to a real-life person and see what they say and how they say it. Listening with a critical ear can teach you so much, but most importantly, one of the biggest things you can learn is syntax. Syntax is an often underexplored aspect of dialogue, but it was one of my personal struggles starting out. I used to write dialogue like I would write description and narration, but those types of writing tend to be more eloquent and complex. They're about telling you information and not having a conversation about it. When speaking, people tend to use simpler language. That's not to say your character should sound like a bunch of 3rd graders, but they also shouldn't sound like Shakespeare. I'll tell you what my high school band teacher told me about musical improv. Keep it simple, stupid. Real-life conversation contains a lot of filler and false starts and people tripping over words and polite blah 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 blah. If you include all of this in your written dialogue, you will probably bore your reader. You want to include just enough to make it feel like real life and then cut the rest. Just record a random conversation you have, then transcribe it. Every sound, every pause, everything. Crazy weather we're having. Right?
What about it?
It's crazy. You'll really start to see how insane real conversation sounds. You don't really notice it while it's happening, but this will teach you how people actually speak and how often it's about the fun weather. When we say we want our stories to have realistic dialogue, what we're actually saying is we want to trick people into thinking our characters sound like actual people. Because if our characters actually sounded like real people, nobody would read it. Finally, one of the best ways to write or revise dialogue is to say it out loud. Honestly, you should be doing this with your entire manuscript, but saying your dialogue out loud will help you hear when it doesn't sound natural. I talked about syntax before, and this is a great way to catch bad syntax. It is much easier to hear when something doesn't quite sound right than it is to read when something isn't quite right. Dialogue is one of the key elements to crafting an engaging story. Make sure your dialogue sounds smooth and natural, but not like too smooth and natural. As in all things, you have to find the balance. Whoa, what is going on? Future Levi. This is Campfire Blaze, the writing software of the future. Nice. Can I have it now? Kind of. Campfire Blaze has just entered its free open beta, and we want all of you and you to try it out. Follow the link down in the description and sign up for free. Start planning for NaNoWriMo, and since I'm from the future, I can tell you, you get published. Check out campfireblaze.com, link in the description. Hey, thanks for watching this video. Make sure you like, subscribe, hit the bell, all the stuff that'll make YouTube like the channel. This video was written by me, Levi Johnson, with help from our friends over at Creative Writing Now. I'll leave a link in the description so you can join their email list to get more brilliant advice like this. Thanks again for watching. You're the best.